Hey everyone, is my video not working?
Yeah, your screen is black, Monica.
Huh, okay. Please hold.
See you now.
Yeah. One of those, I think Siri's always watching me and listening to me. I know she is.
Is Julie's coming in here? Does anybody know?
Yeah, I talked to her like an hour ago and she said she was going to be connecting from her work and she thought she would be fine for the time.
Cool. Carson, do you want to maybe try to get a hold of her?
Yeah, I just texted her.
Okay.
There she is.
Hey, Carson, are we the only ones here?
No,
Carson,
everybody's
can you-
on here.
I can only see you.
It might be the way that you have the view set up. Up on the top right, view gallery.
There we go. All right. Looks like we have a quorum. Hello, everybody. I'm going to call this regular meeting of the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee this October 20th to order. Hello, everyone. Maureen, if you could go ahead and do roll call, please.
Sure, everyone is here. But Chair Bowden,
Get here.
Vice Chair Green,
Present.
Member Dickerson, Member Frangipane,
Here.
Member Strom,
Present.
Member Watson,
Present.
Member Johnson,
Here.
alternate member Redovin.
Here.
All members are present.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next on our agenda is item number 2, consideration of minutes from our previous meeting in September. Would someone please move to approve? Thank you, Sonia. A second?
I second.
Thank you, Monica. Are there any corrections or discussions? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and vote to approve the minutes. Please vote by a show of hands if you approve the minutes. Kara, Tara, and I can't see you, Kara and Tara. Just if you can't do your, there you go. Hi, thank you. Looks like unanimous. Appreciate it. So the minutes are accepted. Next on our agenda is the public forum. Do we have any attendees, Maureen? We do or we don't?
Ms. Brown is an attendee. I don't know if she wants to speak or not.
I don't see her on the gallery.
Yeah, she's under attendee. She is not on the gallery, so I don't know if she wants to speak or not.
Ms. Brown, if you would like to speak, go ahead and enable your speaker. Otherwise, we're going to move forward.
Can she as an attendee?
Can she what?
Speak?
Well, as in the
Can't
public
speak
meeting.
during public forum.
No, I mean, technically, does she have the
Oh.
ability to unmute right now?
If she's on her phone, she can speak. I won't put her on video because she didn't want to be put on video last time.
Okay. That's all right. Okay, well, let's move forward. Colleen, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I had a question. What she had, the email we've got is issues for code enforcement. So why can we move it from new business to code enforcement? Can we
No,
move it
I
up?
put it under new, I put it under new business since we received an email.
Well, it has to do with questions we're going to need to be asking Dave Lewis. So,
Well, he'll still be here. Okay,
okay.
moving forward, I'd like to recognize Code Manager Lewis for code enforcement significant events.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing tonight? Good to see you all. I wanted to start out with just talking a little bit about October. If you're not aware, the governor has declared October as Code Enforcement Appreciation Month. The city did recognize that and celebrated it yesterday, along with other milestones regarding our planning division, which is part of code. They did receive additional certifications. The entire team is now certified with the planning department, which is a huge accomplishment. Most cities don't have the entire team certified, as well as fire prevention week. We did celebrate all of those yesterday, and some kind words were said by the different divisions, and the fire marshal does also fall within the city code. So we really wanted to make sure that we recognize the hard work, dedication, and contributions that everyone from the building department, community development, zoning, are all recognized in the work that they do to keep our community healthy and safe. So that's really worth recognizing. I wanted to give you a few technology updates. Our body worn cameras have arrived. They're currently being programmed and tested, and we hope to have those rolled out next week as part of the police department plan with all officers that take enforcement action wearing a body worn camera. So that is rolling out. We continue to upgrade our technology in our vehicles, allowing us to be more flexible out in the field. And as part of that, we've now started the installation of printers. We're trying to be more proactive with reducing our waste and going more electronic, which would, rather than having those triplicate, quadruple forms that we fill out, it would be automatically transmitted through our reporting systems to the courts. And there'll be one single smaller printout that would be handed to a subject or for a violation. Speaking about technology, I'm really excited that the city continues to increase its GIS programming. And I think some of you have seen hotspots in the past. And we've utilized our technology to increase our proactive enforcement. And within the last 5 years, I did a presentation about when I first came on. Within the last 5 years, code enforcement has actually increased its proactive enforcement, which is officer initiated activities, an additional 43% in the last 5 years. So rather than being reactive, which when I first came on to the division, we were short staffed, didn't have technology, didn't have proper equipment. We've been able to switch that from being reactive to calls only to being proactive. And so we're hovering somewhere between 65 and 70% proactive rate of enforcement, which is tremendous for any code enforcement division. Throughout the country, I think we're leading the way. So many departments have really stepped back and have cut or limited some of their code enforcement capabilities or have been unable to keep up with crumbling infrastructures. And so this really speaks to the vision that our council has had, our city manager has had, and the forethought in moving code enforcement forward. And I know Councilmember Russell, I greatly appreciate your support of our division and the work and the transparency that you've held us to within Code Enforcement Advisory Committee and Council, and really moving code enforcement in a positive direction. So I really wanted to thank Council, but specifically Councilmember Russell, for all of the work that she does specifically related to code enforcement. So thank you for that. Those visions, those dollars are paying off within our community. And I'm really proud to say that our division is also fully staffed. I should knock on something. We're one of the few divisions in the city of Inglewood that does have a relatively low attrition rate. We are fully staffed, and as of next week, our park ranger will be fully trained and brought on board as a solo officer. So that's adding an additional expertise out into the field. So I'm very happy to announce that. I think you all have received the statistics. We've done the best that we can within the system and generating a report for you all without having to manually hand count stuff. And I wanted to, one of the biggest changes that you're going to notice is the way the numbers are reported. We tried within the programming parameters to put in as much information and detailed stuff that you all have been asking for. So we really try to include as much that we can pull without manually counting reports. The way that this counts is differently than the previous program. The previous program counted reports as opened. So when a case was opened, it would be counted statistically. This report only counts those reports that are closed. So the numbers are a little bit different only because it's taking into consideration the closed, not necessarily all of the open cases. And as you know, open cases can go anywhere from a couple days to a couple months, depending on the circumstance in the code. So that's the biggest difference that you'll see within this report. I wanted to just get some feedback from you all to see if this report, if you're liking the way that you view this and some of the things that you're seeing, kind of what the feedback is, and if I can provide any direction, if there's anything that we can do to possibly make this beneficial to the committee and to be transparent within the community.
David, thank you. Dave, thank you very much. I had a question on the 6th line. It says ending case number EPD. What does that refer to?
So if you all know, we're trying to also track the number of cases that we've opened and closed, and this makes it a little bit easier for us to understand. So when it says case ending, that's the report number that we ended on for the month. So we started May at 0 because we went to that new reporting system, and then they're numerically added. So you'll see that we started at 482, and at the end of September, we ended at 2182. So that's the number that's been generated for the report that was taken.
So that's cumulative as the year progresses?
Yes, and then we'll start over again on January 1, and then it'll read EPDC 22.
Where are you looking at? Is this the statistics report that Maureen sent us?
Yes.
So I didn't follow what you were just asking about, Chair Bowden. Where is that?
On the first page, if you see case type, then total cases, underneath total cases, the 6th line says ending case number EPD C21.
Okay, thank you.
And so those numbers are cumulative beginning in May, it looks like.
Right. I also need to let you know that when we do generate a case number, it may not be all encompassing of that contact. It's still a single case number. There may be additional notes or additional subjects that are attached to that case number. For example, if we're doing enforcement in a park and we happen to contact 12 people, that number is not captured because it's a single event. It's the same with the police department. It's a single event that may have multiple violations attached to that. That's a rare circumstance where we contact 12 people at one time. That's just an extreme example.
Okay. Colleen, you had a question?
Yes. Actually, I'm kind of confused because the listing under animal control, how do we know what code section that is involved in that? Because it just says livestock.
So we're not able to break things out specifically by the code number. That's not possible in this system. So we have to physically assign a generic tab to pull that information. So these are the specific tabs that were selected, and these are consistent with what we also have to report to the state. So we made the tab consistent with that general content.
Well, that wasn't the full amount of my question. We got, how do we know how many summons and complaints were issued on each one of these categories?
That the system's not able to pull that.
Well, we were able to get it before.
That was one of the only benefits of the previous system was its reporting process. This system does not report in that way. So that's
well. Is there any way we can get the information on? Well, like you've got running at large. Is that not taking into account the Parks and Recreation code of leash and what does livestock mean?
Very easy. Livestock is any animal that's not defined as dog or a cat.
That we just changed that to domesticated animals.
Right. This is for reporting purposes only. I can't break it out any differently. This is what we've been asked to do by the state as well.
Well, I don't understand the charge on livestock. What is it? Cruelty and neglect or prohibited animals?
So this is a subcategory that we have to report out on. So the charge isn't livestock. That's when we would have to put a subcategory, assign it to livestock. There may be a cruelty and neglect associated with the livestock, but we have to do a subcategory of livestock in order to report that accurately to the state.
So is it that there's an animal that's not allowed in Inglewood?
Correct. For example, we may investigate a report of a prohibited animal. It also may be livestock like a llama or a pig or a horse that a gentleman had last year in his backyard. So we still have to list it as livestock so that we're able to pull that out. But we have more than one category. We take the primary category, which would be the number of animals. And then that is the livestock one is broken out as a specific subsection, just so we can keep track of the livestock associated with that call for service.
Does that mean that one instance of dealing with livestock for cruelty neglect would add ticks to both livestock and cruelty neglect?
Potentially, and that's the only section that would do that, but that's the only way the system allows us. As you can see, we may only have 5 or 6 livestock reports over the year, because most of our livestock is, some of our livestock is allowed. So example, chickens, it may be associated with noise, it may be associated with odor, it may be associated with cruelty neglect. So it's just a subsection, and that number shouldn't be dramatically impact the overall statistics. But in order for us to break it out and be able to report on it, we have to put an additional subcategory for livestock.
What does noise fall under?
So that would fall under the miscellaneous.
What all else, do you have like a list of what all might fall into miscellaneous?
No, because it's kind of the catch-all that does not pertain to each of these. The system doesn't allow us to break out each individual ordinance. It only allows us to put in the subcategories. If you were to look at the way that we enter the data, we have certain fields that we have to fill out. And as we scroll through to categorize one of these, for example, in order to get how a call is received, we actually had to build a box with those specific criteria in order to bring that information forward. Same with the code enforcement, animal welfare, we have to categorize the primary violation.
Well, I mean, wouldn't those be categories that could be added to? I mean, if you guys have a new system, I can't imagine that the categorization is a hard fixed thing.
So these had to be submitted prior to going live. Any changes to this may result in a significant amount of money to reprogram the system.
To
Like we don't
add
have control.
categories?
So this is complicated. We don't own this program. This program is shared between multiple jurisdictions, and we had to pay an additional fee to build out a specific code enforcement category. We can evaluate and look at this. We're still in the infancy, so if there's changes that we want to see, we can propose those. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can make that change. For example, we are looking at proposing a voucher program. The only way to monitor for illegal dumping, the only way to categorize that is we'd have to put a subcategory within one of these that would, for example, case status. We would be able to enter, and we've submitted that voucher status. But we have to actually go through the county. It is very difficult to change these. It's not an easy process, is what I'm trying to explain, and I apologize for that.
What does permits issued reflect?
That could be a transit permit. It could be a bee permit. It could be a dangerous dog permit.
Oh, got it.
And again, that's a separate category that does not go into the total account for the cases. These are subcategories that we had to specifically break out away from the total category so that we can capture those to report them.
Yeah.
And so the numbers in notice of violation, that doesn't include notices of violation that are on cases that have not been closed?
Correct.
Is there any way to have a sense of the total pending cases compared to what has been closed?
We're trying to figure that out. Again, this isn't an easy system to use, and this report was just generated, and we're submitting it in real time to you all. We're still working out some of the issues and some of the things that we'd like to see forward, but I thought it was important to bring this forward as soon as possible because you guys were asking for this. I'm not able to bring up pending cases because there's no way without individually viewing each officer and what cases they currently have open and doing an individual hand count, am I able to provide that information? And it changes daily. Code officers could open 20 cases, they could close 50 cases. There's just no accurate way of working on or providing statistical information. So the system, the way they programmed it, was to do it on the back end of when cases were closed.
So even as code manager, you don't have a view of all pending cases?
I can view each individual officer within a queue. It's very confusing because we have a bunch of queues that are in place that I have to scroll through to utilize. So I wouldn't be able to count those, to capture them, to present to you because it changes hourly, minute, daily. So this is the most accurate Snapchat or the photo snap of what has been closed because that's the most accurate way to report this.
And cases are always tied to a single officer?
There is a primary officer and it is associated with that officer. There may be other officers that do supplemental reports and it's the same for the police department.
Okay.
And then if that gets escalated within the, for example, the investigation, we do all of our investigations. So once the police are done with the case, it gets forwarded to Detective Bureau and then they manage the case from there on. Ours is different because we are not only the investigating officer, we're the initiating officer that takes the complaint, we're the investigating officer, we're the officer that closes the case based off of what the status is. We're also the probationary officer that has to continue to do the follow-up on specific court-ordered cases. So it's not just a workflow. We had to put all of the different workflows from the police department into one code enforcement template workflow.
What is unfounded? A report that was not really a violation?
It was not a violation.
What about UTL, UTC?
Those are typically used for animals or a call for service where we're unable to locate that call for service. Or let's say the dog was running at large, when we responded, the dog was no longer there. So that would be unable to locate.
Thank you.
Well, it certainly is a lot more information than we got with the prior report in terms of the detail for the case status. So what's the difference between between case type on the front page and then case status on the back page?
The case status is primarily utilized when we close out a case. So what was the ultimate final outcome of that case? So for example, you'll see abate. That would be a situation where we've abated that case and we've closed it. Not all cases, once a notice of violation is issued, we close the case with a notation, but we don't change the status of that case unless it's been escalated. So for example, we may issue a warning, that case would be closed immediately after the warning. If it was a notice of violation and we went back, so we put a notice on the door for weeds. We went ahead and did a reinspection within 7 days. We go ahead and put a notation on the file that they're in compliance and we close the case. There's no way of closing it as technically in compliance. The in compliance ones that you're seeing is we may have done some follow-up work on that and gone back and the court may have redirected us to try and close out the case prior to going to court.
One more
And
question.
then summons pending, I think you might ask about that. Summons pending is typically used for dogs. So if we were to pick up a dog running at large and we transport it to the shelter, at the time that summons may have been pending while we're waiting for the owner to come forward. But this specific snapshot is going to be different than the total cases because this is a subcategory that we have to assign at the bottom of each report. And again, we're still learning as we're using the system. It's not as easy.
How about public relations? What does that refer to?
Public relations typically is when we've taken some type of action and education is taking place. So we may have met with an owner of a property and explained some of the code to them. They may have called on the phone to report something and have a conversation. And so we would close it as public relations. We use that a lot in people that are seeking information. We also use it a lot within our park system.
Further questions for code? Oh, Rita? Councilmember
Thank
Rita?
you. And thank you, Dave, for the report. I appreciate this. I do have a question on the under grass and weeds. Does the summer season end in August? I mean, are we just using temporary help during the summer months?
We are using temporary help, and enforcement doesn't stop. As you are aware of what occurred within the last 2 weeks along
Yes.
Bellevue Avenue.
Uh-huh.
So we do continue, most of it's not proactive weed enforcement because we are still working on some of our major cases. If we do see situations that are considered major, the officer does investigate that. And if we do receive complaints, we of course investigate those as well. That's a great question.
Well, thank you. And I just have one more question. Remind me, have we hired somebody, or was it in a totally different department than code enforcement, where one person was going to, even though it was seasonal, they would perhaps be available more? Or are we talking about that for future budget, maybe in 2022?
We lost you, Dave.
You're muted, Dave.
My computer is being sensitive tonight. So based on what the budget was last year, we do just hire the seasonal person for the summer, just like we do other departments. Next year, I do believe there is an item to have 2 seasonal people. As you all can see from the statistics, we are overworked. I shouldn't say overworked. We have a considerable amount of responsibilities, and we did inspect 9,277 properties this summer for growth, weeds and growth. And we did issue 1,443, the seasonal person did, of weeds. We only get a snapshot of that specific moment at that specific time within the growing season of that particular house. So we're hoping next year, and I think it is in the budget, to have 2 seasonal people so that we're able to double that weed enforcement alley side and front of property. So it's not just a snapshot of that one time and moment when we did the inspection, but we may be able to do, or we will be able to do additional inspections of that specific property over the season.
Right, I appreciate that. And is it possible the park ranger will be able, maybe in the winter months, to do some other things? Park ranger is not seasonal, are they?
They are not seasonal, and the park ranger position is actually defined as park ranger animal welfare. So they're also doing animal welfare investigations alongside code enforcement. That was the way that we were able to do the budget, to split it between police and the parks budgets. We are hoping to have additional programming within the winter months, because as you all know, we have unpredictable weather. It could be snowy one day and 2 days later it's 70 and I'm wearing shorts and playing tennis. So we do have increased enforcement activities that will take place seasonally. We're also hoping to add more programming where we'll have walks with the ranger, we'll have some nature hikes. We'll do more of the community relations, not just enforcement within our parks, which is really what our community has been asking for. We're also looking at potentially hosting some fishing derbies and a few other activities for our younger folks in the community, utilizing that park ranger.
Thank you very much. I appreciate, it's not always easy when you change software, apparently.
No, y'all, I have to tell you, this has been, you all know I have a son, and so that creates some of my gray hair, but this programming transfer and new technologies and everything that we're incorporating over the last year has just caused my hair to thin out and get even grayer. So I appreciate your patience in bringing this forward, because we really are implementing a lot of things over a 1-year period, and it can be tough. if you've ever gone through that at work with the implementation of multiple different programming and technology issues.
Further, Carson?
Yeah, thank you, Manager Lewis. And I had a question about the body cams. Are those the same for code enforcement as police officers?
They are exactly the same.
Have you already gone through the training?
So we've had an initial training. We are getting issued the cameras tomorrow. And we'll start an additional training phase of about a week, just so that everyone can get used to wearing them, the technologies. We have to actually tag each video with a case number, status. So it's basically adding to our workload in order to make it more transparent for our community to understand where our concerns within the community lie.
And how do they work? Are they on by default when you're encountering a citizen or a person, or do you have to manually turn them on?
They are constantly recording only video. They're not constantly recording audio, and then they tape over themselves, usually depending on use within a 12 to 24-hour period. These are great questions, by the way.
How does when does the audio kick in?
The audio kicks in when it's automatically activated. It also will back up for 3 seconds. So that period, I think 3 seconds, is captured during that particular encounter. They are activated whenever an enforcement action is taken based on our policy. So if we're out doing regular patrolling, it's not on. And they're only on our person. Unlike the police, they're on every single car. So when they activate their lights, or they turn on their camera, or they go over a certain speed, they automatically activate within the car. We don't have those capabilities within code enforcement. We're not running exponentially to calls for service. We're not running red lights. We're not going through those liabilities that the police department may have.
When you say automatically start the audio, what is the automatic? How does that happen?
That only works when, and not for us.
Oh.
That is only for police officers.
So
We have
for
to
code enforcement, when does audio turn on?
when the camera is activated by the officer.
So the camera is not always recording for code enforcement?
The visual portion of the camera is always recording. The audio portion is the only one that's recorded when the camera is activated.
So the video is always recording, and then
But it gets taped over,
how frequently?
usually within 12 to 24 hours, depending on how often the camera is activated.
But if it's always recording, then what does when it's activated mean?
When the officer initiates and turns on the camera. And this
What's
is
the difference? But I'm just so confused now. If it's always recording, what does the officer have to do
We
to?
actually have to activate it, to activate the audio and visual recording to capture that moment, so that we're able to, when we put it in our docking station, it transmits that data for that encounter into the web and the database system.
So it's not really effectively automatic. It does require officer activation.
Yes.
Okay, so then the policy would be whenever you start an encounter, before you encounter, you would turn it on, or how would that work?
It depends on the circumstance, and we're still exploring those specific policies. The officers have something that's very different. It's written into state law. We are not a part of that state law. Their requirement now is whenever they're approaching a call for service, so they get a call, they're supposed to activate it prior to arriving to the scene, or when they have an encounter. For example, they're maybe driving down the street and someone flags them down, they'll activate that body camera at the time of encountering that person.
I
And
see.
that's
So it's
similar
not
to
even required for code enforcement?
So our policy is to, whenever we have take an enforcement action, that's when we're going to utilize our camera.
Right, but what you're saying is that as far as state law, it's not required for code enforcement?
No,
So we're just kind of adding to that by following the police standards for code enforcement, like up to a point, I guess, like what makes sense for you guys?
yes, initially code enforcement was excluded from the body camera program. We had serious conversations about what would be in the best interest of the city, and then the best interest of transparency with the community. And we decided to go above and beyond what is required. And it's actually above and beyond an industry standard for code enforcement. Again, that's why I'm saying the city is leading the way in the way that it's approaching its enforcement actions and really devoting its time to making sure that transparency and protection is happening for all that are involved.
That's great. Thank you very much for more detail on that. I wish it was in place when you dealt with the mountain lion.
I look back and I kind of wish I had that too. But, and there is an upcoming quick little article in the Citizen magazine about the
Oh, cool.
So look forward to seeing that.
Thank you.
Further questions for Code Manager Lewis? All right, well, thank you, Dave, for all this information. It's great to get started. I think we're going to be learning right along with you as we move forward. So I'm sure we'll have more questions. And thank you for fielding all of those questions.
Of course.
Okay, moving forward, we'll go to agenda item number 4, which is an update from City Council Liaison Russell, Peter Russell.
Thank you. It's great to be here this evening. And it's great to have the Code Enforcement Department fully staffed, and the City Attorney's office is now also fully staffed. So that is a blessing for the city, and I do appreciate all that code enforcement has to do, and in the last couple of weeks, there was an issue that was in the newspaper about weeds on Bellevue, and so I'm sure the code enforcement officers were busy issuing notices of violation. And then Monday night, City Council gave consensus to the city manager to get the city to cut the weeds this one time, because they're pretty tall. And I have a few concerns about the safety of those citizens that back up to Bellevue. They don't have access from their fence, and some of them have to walk 4 blocks to get back behind their fence to trim the weeds. But anyway, I am very glad to hear that code enforcement is becoming more proactive, and I knew that was happening, and it's overwhelming. I think it takes a while to change things, but I appreciate all that this committee does also, and the direction that you give, and it's been very helpful. So that's all that I have tonight, I think, unless you all have questions.
Nope. Okay,
All right,
looks
thank
like
you.
there are no questions, so we'll move forward with agenda item number 6 for communications update from Monica, please. Member Johnson. Monica?
Oh, sorry. Communications? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, sorry. I actually had a question because I haven't gotten the magazine outreach that they usually do for the winter article. And it seems like it's late in the game, so maybe I can reach out to Vanessa. Is that? Yeah, I'll reach out to her. But she's been making posts and everything looks good on that front. And then, but they're putting in something in the magazine about snow buddies, and I'm sure they'll do it online, and that will be upcoming. So I think, did they change the name of Keep Englewood Beautiful or whatever that committee was? The other, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, they did. We did change, I think, the name and the direction.
Yeah, they're.
That committee a little bit, something about sustainability, I think it was.
And they were in charge of like that, communicating on that fall leaf collection, right? Did that already happen? Or did it happen in November?
It may be happening in November. I don't know for sure. I don't think it's happened yet.
Okay, I think that would be a good thing for Vanessa to communicate about. And I don't know if they're still in charge of that. So that would be something that we could communicate on if it, you know, came under our purview at some point. Other
The
than that,
next-
I don't really have anything.
The next magazine, I think, comes out right around the 1st of November. I
Oh.
only know that because it was my turn to write an article, so. it
So
should be
did
coming
you
out.
get the submit thing from Slate to submit your article? Do you get that when you write an article? For the
No,
magazine?
when we write an article, we send it to Chris Hargeth. And Chris Hargeth takes care of it and he bugs you until you get your article in.
Well, they gave me the editorial, like I got the editorial version, like from Slate and and I would send my article to the copywriter. And I got the email for the topic for submission, but I never got anything further. They usually send you a thing like you need to submit it by this day, and it's really weird.
I'm not sure what, and I apologize, I don't know what, I'm not involved in that process. I get the same notifications to submit my information. But I just reviewed and signed off on the final draft of our portion. And there is something in there about snow buddies. There is something about wildlife. There is something about trash cans.
Okay,
So they're kind of reformatting it a little bit, so it's gonna look a little different with more boxes and stuff, but your
Okay.
information is in there.
okay, so I submitted the topics, all those topics, and I submitted you as a source for that. They just went ahead and wrote it.
So
Yeah.
typically what Slate does, just so that this team understands, they'll typically will take all the submissions and articles, and they even take my articles, and they rewrite them and format it to spacing and change a few verbiage things. I think the only people they don't really do that for is for council members, but they do take all of our information and they reformat it and change it around. But they do take our ideas.
Yeah,
and move
okay,
forward with the content and the idea of what you're trying to put forward.
okay, love it. Yeah, so other than that, I don't really have anything.
Well, I do think, we had talked about at our last meeting that the communications team seemed to be, taking on, once we provide them with the direction, they seem to be taking on more of the role, which is, I think probably what we want, especially when they interact directly with Dave anyway. So thank you for all that you do, Monica. All right, moving on. Are there any further questions for Member Johnson? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move to item number 7, which is new business. The first new business item that I would like to discuss is an email that we received from a resident regarding milkweeds. It was in your agenda packet, and if I can give you a highlight and a background for the email, that might help us get started on the right track. So a resident had tall weeds in their yard and received a notice that they must cut down the weeds. And a neighbor noticed that she had milkweed in the middle of her weeds. The resident herself did not know that she had milkweed. And there was a concern from the neighborhood, the neighbor, considering the fact that monarch butterflies actually utilize the milkweed for food and a defense. So the concern was that code enforcement is forcing the cut down of milkweed, which is a critical component to our ecosystem. And that's simply not the case. We rely on the owners to know what they have in their yard. In this case, the owner was given a heads up by their neighbor, and then and the neighbor is who wrote the email. But our code enforcement officers are not botanists. They're not, experts in gardening. So when they see tall weeds or when they receive a complaint for tall weeds, they issue the directive to have them cut down, and it's up to the owner to know that they have milkweed. Carson?
So what is supposed to happen then? They get a notice that they're supposed to cut their weeds down. They have milkweed. Are they supposed to go through a particular process to say, no, this isn't a weed, I shouldn't have this notice?
Yes,
What is that process?
it's a verbal conversation. If they received a notice on their door, then they pick up the phone and call code enforcement and let them know that, yes, they do have weeds, but in the midst of the weeds, there is milkweed, should not be cut down. And at that point, that's the extent of my knowledge. So code enforcement officer, Code Manager Lewis, if you would like to
Hi
speak up.
again. So this was a very unusual situation, and we are very empathetic, and we work diligently, myself included, at the state level to protect our insects, our pollinators. This was one of those situations where the neighbor had no idea that any of her plants that she had, whether they were intentionally planted, were beneficial. And people can articulate how different plants are beneficial for our environment. We don't have any exclusions. We don't have any specific terminology around what weeds are excluded or not excluded within our ordinance. It's very generalized. We do work with our residents. For example, this comes up frequently when we start posting. Dandelions are one of the first things that we start hearing complaints about. And you can have dandelions. You can have as many dandelions as you want, as long as they're not over 6 inches. Well, the problem is the life cycle of a dandelion, as you all know, if you don't know, within 24 hours, shoot up, flower, close, then shoot up their spores another 24 hours later to catch wind and spread. Well, that's when it becomes over 24 hours. Many of our residents have expressed concerns that this is early food for pollinators. And so it kind of works within that 14 to 21 day notice of violation, where we allow them a little more time before we take the more heavy-handed approach with those types of weeds. We can't exclude someone from ordinance, but if they can articulate something was intentionally planted as landscaping. We had a situation several years ago where somebody a resident was very angry about the thistles in this person's yard. And when we posted it, the resident contacted us and said, these aren't thistles, I intentionally planted this. I brought these back from Scotland. I do crafts, I utilize this particular variety of a thistle in my cottage industry. And I conveyed that to the city attorney at the time, and there would be no way we can convict grass and weeds because it was an intentionally planted flower. Grasses and weeds, grasses are ornamental. If you were to come to my house right now, I have an ornamental grass that's 11 feet tall, but it's intentionally planted ornamental grass. So this is kind of where it gets into some tricky language and articulation and how the city would move forward with grass and weeds. And again, we kind of go off of the status of what the state lists as noxious weeds. But again, that's not, we can prove our case that something's over 6 inches. We can't necessarily prove the use or what that intended item is done for. That's specifically up to the court. So this is more of a training and a policy and a one-off situational awareness. Not many people have milkweed planted in their yard. Milkweed only grows in specific conditions in specific areas with lighting condition, water conditions, seed dispersal. So again, this is something that we would work with the homeowner on in future situations.
Colleen, you have your hand raised?
Oh, yeah. I just wanted, you answered most of my question, and I just wanted to confirm, when I read that email, it sounded like code enforcement went over there and told her she'd get a big fine if she didn't do what they told her to right then. I don't know if that's true, but you follow the process and you have instructed all of your personnel to follow the process. Is that correct?
Yes.
The process is door hanger. If they don't comply, posting notice. If they don't comply or ask for an administrative hearing, then you can issue a summons and complaint. none of your personnel would ever say to a homeowner, I'm going to fine you a big fine if you don't do it right now.
No, we do have the process. Our weeds notice is strongly written. It does not mean immediately. We still outline the process, even within that notice. In that notice, it does talk about the abatement process. That homeowner did not ever communicate with us. I know we're talking about a specific case. I do have the permission to talk about this specific case. So at the request of the homeowner and of Ms. Brown. So just so you all are aware, and typically I wouldn't discuss an individual case. The homeowner also had additional weeds. It wasn't just this one particular patch. And she had no idea of what these items specifically were planted in her yard. And so it was an educational opportunity this year for that particular homeowner and code enforcement for future years, so that that homeowner can better articulate. And again, not all milkweed comes up every year. It may not have reseeded itself. It may not have the ideal conditions for that particular property. It is not an easy, which is part of the problem we're having with monarch butterflies. It's not an easy cultivated landscape item.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to confirm that you would never do such a thing as go over and tell her she's going to get a big fine if she doesn't cut everything down right then.
No, but the posting notice does outline that there is a fine if the city does have to come out and abate. And so all that process is outlined, and it's not meant to be, like you say, we follow the process. So if we were to follow the entire process from beginning to end, that person would have 21 days before we actually took some legal matter step forward. So that would have allowed for a little bit more time for the milkweed. And again, if she was able to articulate that this was an intentionally planted item, we have several situations in the city. We have one strip of land where they plant wildflowers. They go to seed. People think they're weeds. They're not. They were intentionally planted wildflowers that have to reseed themselves every year. So it's kind of one of those gray areas where we try to stay within the boundaries of code, but to also honor the homeowners and some of their intentionally planted landscape items.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for clarification.
Is there further comment regarding Ms. Brown's email on milkweed? I have a question on protocol. Since Ms. Brown sent us an email and has not attended the meeting, so she's not hearing our discussion, how am I supposed to respond to her? Do I respond to her email, Dave?
So you are, as the chair, you're more than welcome to reach out to her, because she did submit this to writing to you, and I'm sure Maureen can clarify this. I have had conversations with Ms. Brown about this, and so she understands our position. I'll say it's very disappointing that this occurred this year. Like I said, we are big on pollinators and protecting them and working forward. And again, I'm looking at this from a learning experience for everyone involved.
Well, it's refreshing to hear that we still have gray areas, and that code enforcement is, accessible to residents for question and to work together to come to a resolution. So I appreciate that. I have a unique situation in that I got stuck at work and I have to leave the building. So I'm going to call a 20-minute recess so that I can leave the building and get home. I'm not that far from home. But next on our, there's two items next on our discussion that I think are important. Number one is an update on our bylaws. So if you have not had a chance to review our bylaws, please do that while we're at a 20-minute rest. And then secondly, I put together a 2022 priority list, and I want to bring together a discussion on that. Colleen, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I wanted to ask that we postpone the discussion on the bylaws. When I looked through everything, sure, we should have done it back in March, but we're so close to next March and we may have a few new members. I would like to ask that we wait until March to discuss the bylaws.
Okay, Is there any discussion on that recommendation? Any questions? Does anyone have an issue with us postponing that conversation until next March?
Can I ask Chair Bowden, how do you feel about that?
I don't have a problem with postponing it at all. I don't think there's anything in the bylaws right now that is negatively impacting our ability to work together and follow our purpose. So I don't have any burning issues at this point, unless somebody else has a concern that they want to address between now and March. I am fine with postponing the conversation until next March. Okay.
I agree.
All right, so everyone please look at the priority list, which is actually left over from our conversation this time last year. So I just basically provided an update to where we are. And then I also listed what we had said we also wanted to cover that we didn't get to. So it's just a beginning point. I just want to hear, what are things that we should be working on, especially Dave, for code enforcement, if there's any burning issues that you would like to see us address. And likewise, Council Member Liaison Rita, if you wouldn't mind speaking up if there's anything you know of that needs to be covered. And then I'll give you an update on our presentation to City Council 2 weeks ago. And then I will be back with you guys. Let's meet back at 7:25. And thank you for allowing me to do this.
So I'll keep the meeting going, but you all can, you can all take off if you want for a bit.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Got it. Okay. Took a little bit longer to close than I expected. And I'm pretty dark. Hold on. Let me turn a light on. There we go. So this time of year, we've just made it a routine to review what we're working on and why we're working on it, and especially wanting to hear any priorities that code enforcement has, any issues that they see, because a lot of the code that we've changed over the past several years has been based on input from the code enforcement team. And then also what's going on with City Council. Is there anything that City Council would like the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee to review and look at? So if I can start with Code Manager Lewis on any input or priorities that you see coming up that we should work on.
One concern that's starting to trickle back in again is regarding the scooters. We're starting to get more reports and complaints about scooters being left in places, being ridden on sidewalks, dealing with bike lanes. And so this is starting to trickle in again. And I'm not sure if this is the purview for your department to take up, or if you even have the power to take that up. It is just something to put on your radar that it's coming and there are no rules regarding it.
So would you put motorized vehicles, whether they're scooters or even bikes, I guess, under the jurisdiction of code enforcement, or is that more of a police issue?
It could be a conversation of both, because we're running into parking issues, we're running into obstruction of right-of-way issues when they are being abandoned. So it kind of goes over the gamut of several different agencies or different departments, excuse me.
Is it on the radar for the police force to address?
It is. It's also been discussed by the transportation subcommittee. I think they've had conversations, not real recent, but within the last year, I believe they've had conversations about it as well. So it's, again, it's something that's creeping up, and I know we're all trying to come up with alternative ways of transport, but it's now starting, people are getting them abandoned in their front yard, and
Oh, yeah.
so it's starting to become a burden where we're needing to report it to the different agencies that rent those out to come and pick them up.
Okay.
We're also dealing with, we have no regulations regarding shopping carts. Several communities have taken this up because it is causing an undue blight and burden to the city of Inglewood. We're finding them abandoned in different areas. The city's having to retrieve them. Stores aren't being as cooperative in retrieving them. They're being left in alleys. They're being left in parks. They're just everywhere. And so we're really having a frustration in code enforcement as well as public works and the nuisance that these shopping carts are creating. And the stores really not taking any ownership or responsibility. And there's ordinances in other cities where they actually charge fines to stores. They charge theft charges through police departments. They also have ordinances that require them to have anti-theft devices where you can't take them out of parking lots. So I'm pretty sure most of you have seen them all over the neighborhoods, and we can't keep up. And this is not just homeless people. So those that are experiencing difficulties, we're seeing just everyday people using them to take groceries back and forth and then leaving them behind their apartment complexes. Those are the two time-consuming issues that are burdening code enforcement right now.
Thank you, Code Manager Lewis. Rita, you have your hand raised?
Thank you. The one thing when Code Member Lewis was talking about the stores, I know that when I take an older lady to Walgreens rarely has any carts, but they were saying that their carts cost, it was somewhere around $500 and some odd a piece. And when you have smaller stores like Walgreens, but I know I've talked to the people at King Soopers, and the people that are stealing them just push really hard until it breaks the wheels to get across the parking lot. And I don't know what the solution is, but I know it's a drain on the retail places too, because those carts cost a lot of money. And I mean, when when I take my older friends to Walgreens, she has to use her walker because there are no carts there. So
there really isn't an answer. And thank you for bringing those points up. It really has been difficult, and we really had a hard time communicating with the stores to try and get their cooperation, whether they hire someone that goes in the neighborhoods to go pick them up. We have a whole graveyard over at the city warehouse over at Public Works of, I would say, a couple hundred disabled, broken carts that have been found throughout the city.
all right, I appreciate that. I mean, maybe that's something we could get the public's help with, maybe. So, all right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Colleen, your hand is raised?
Yes. Am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yes.
I get confused and tongue-tied when that happens. Anyway, it's not within our purview currently. Shopping carts aren't. We'd have to get direction from the city council to take it up if it's something we could actually deal with. But I think Councilmember Russell is correct. It's something that it's not really part of our code. As far as scooters are concerned, that is a situation where it has been part of the vehicle code before, those scooters. For a while, all you could do was ride them on the sidewalk. You couldn't ride them in the streets. And then that changed. And it also is not part of our purview at this current time. So it's another thing we'd have to get direction from City Council for. But I think it could be something the communication subcommittee could deal with from an educational standpoint. And we do need to get the merchants involved in this, because it's their stuff that's being stolen. And they have security guards all over the place, usually police, and they could keep an eye out. And if somebody tries to leave the parking lot with a cart, they could stop it. But in the meantime, it's not officially ours, and it's not a matter to be dealt with in code. Scooters maybe, but they were at one point dealt with in code, and I don't know where that stands now.
Thanks for your feedback. I'm just concerned because it is an extreme drain on the city, and they are illegally being dumped throughout the city. And as we deal with the concerns related to illegal dumping, and I know council is really working on this, and we're still trying to work out the details of a voucher program to be announced to try and help with that. I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that it is causing a drain on resources within the city.
Dave, what's a voucher program?
We are currently in the final phases of implementing a voucher program that I believe the city council has discussed, related to illegal dumpings, where a portion of the fee associated with illegal dumping would be reimbursed to the owner once they're able to file a police report and prove that they've paid an extra fee to have those illegally dumped items removed. Again, it's in the final phases. It's not official to be announced, but it has been on the radar in conversations of council. So it's important for you all to know, because that program would be administered by the Code Enforcement Department.
Interesting. Well, I don't know if you've ever ridden a scooter, Dave. Your son certainly will be shortly, but they actually encourage you. That's one of the selling points, that you can leave the scooter wherever you want and it will be picked up. And there's actually people that I know that they go around, or at least they used to, I don't know if they still do it, but they go around at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning and pick up the scooters all over the city and return them to wherever they're supposed to be, and they get paid to do that. But it's actually a selling point for them, is that you just drop it wherever you want to drop it. It's okay. Carson, you have your hand raised? We can barely hear you.
Sorry, I've tried out the scooters a few times, and some of the companies do require you to return them to certain spots and some don't. And I think that may be a municipal rule type thing too. Like some municipalities do some kind of official allowing of different companies to operate within their borders, but then only if the scooter company requires that the scooters be returned to particular corners, which I guess helps for the whole collecting and picking up and not being all over, but obviously less convenient for the rider to be able to leave it wherever they end up. But I've experienced both, where you could leave it anywhere and where you have to leave it in a certain spot, or it's going to keep charging you unless you take it to one of those spots, or it's going to charge you extra. So there's a pretty easy built-in incentive to make you have to return them to particular places based on how they charge for it.
Thank you. Council Liaison Russell.
Thank you. I know that we had a company, and I think it might have been Bird Scooters. It's been several months ago, come and talk to City Council about the program. And the bottom line is currently Inglewood is not participating in the program. I believe that Littleton is. And so it does create a problem because they don't come into Inglewood to pick them up unless someone would call, I believe, and complain. If they said if they had a contract with Inglewood, then I think it would be much easier for them to pick up. So I think that's part of what's going on with the problem, people leaving them. I mean, I know that in my neighborhood, there's been 2 or 3 different bicycles left. They'll put them in somebody's yard, the people move them out of the yard, they end up in the street. So, I don't know.
Okay. Do we currently have we licensed people to operate in Inglewood? Is that something we do?
I don't believe we have done that yet. I mean, do you know, Code Manager Lewis?
To my knowledge, I'm not aware of any current contracts or authorizations or agreements that the city of Inglewood has made. Which
I don't.
again, like you
So
said,
those
is
that
contributing
operate
to the problem.
here, those that operate here just do because they can,
Yes,
and they're not required to be licensed or authorized. Interesting. Okay, interesting. Okay, thank you. Anything else, Code Manager Lewis, for priorities?
no, those are more of the trouble sticking areas that we're having. I think we're really, we don't have any major suggestions that would make our lives easier, like the ordinance that you just did with changing animals for impounds or dealing with snow or working on the trees ordinance. I think those are very helpful. I know you have this on your purview. I think council has asked for you to flesh out a little bit more on the trees and presenting some ideas. I think that might keep you pretty busy and bogged down for a while. Not bogged down in a negative way, but in a very positive way, because it's something that is truly going to benefit our citizens.
Okay, thank you. Any follow-up questions for Code Manager Lewis? Otherwise, if I can ask City Council Liaison Rita Russell to speak up on anything that you know about going on with City Council or with the city in general that we may need to proactively put on our priority list.
Right now, I don't know of anything that you need to proactively put on your priority list. I'm sure there probably are things, but nothing comes to mind right off the top of my head.
Well, that's encouraging. I mean, it's actually encouraging to me because, we've done this exercise, every year for I think 4 or 5 years now, and pretty much everything that City Council has requested or code enforcement has brought to our attention has been addressed. So that's really encouraging to me. But as you can see, some of the priorities that we had identified for 2021, 3 of them are currently in progress. One is, tree and shrub code in anticipation of EAB. Secondly, dangerous dog code. And thirdly, to review bylaws. And we'll still keep that on there because we know we have to do it in 2022. I can't believe I just said that word, 2022. Further things that we had put on our radar and did not get to, number 4 is committee guidelines for communication with the community, especially regarding community inquiries. And this specifically relates to social media, conversations that come up on Instagram or with Twitter or on Nextdoor. A lot of it happens regarding code, and currently we do not respond to those, nor is the city allowed to respond to those. And the idea here was that do we want to put in a procedure in place where when we see something come up regarding code, that the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee steps up as the authoritative resource on everything code and try and answer those questions for the community. Does anyone want to add to that? Okay. Secondly, the remainder was animal licensing. And I would propose that we take this off of our priority because we know that that is something now that is being addressed at the city level. And if it does come into play, actually, maybe we leave it on because if it does come into play, that definitely will impact code. But only if the city decides to go that direction. Any comment on that? Nope. Okay. There was a request to update the alley weeds ordinance, and I can't remember why we felt like there was a need to update the alley/weeds ordinance. Colleen, of course you remember. Thank you.
Specifically that we ever even put that on as a priority, because alley is a whole different ball of wax, and the weed ordinance is the weed ordinance, and it doesn't need to be updated unless we want to increase the height of weeds or specifically eliminate certain types of grass like native grasses. I think that can go away because there isn't really anything to update.
Okay.
It is, yeah, so. I don't even know how it got on there as a priority.
I honestly cannot recall why that ended up there. And I would actually have to go back to our minutes, and I didn't do that before our meeting. So I'm actually going to leave that as an open item. And let me see if I can't get some more background on that to give it the respect it deserves. Number 7 was Title 7, Chapter 1 on public safety, animals and fowl in general. That was relating to some changes that we were looking at to be in line with state law, and it had to do specifically with off leash. Co-Manager Lewis, do you have any insight here?
Yes, I think it possibly could be taken off of your radar. We do have a new deputy city attorney who does specialize in a lot of different areas, and one area that they will most likely evaluate within the next year to two would be some changes to Title 7. But I think the major changes that needed to be done, this body has already addressed to make sure our jobs are easier. I know that there were some concerns about changing barking dog to be more consistent. I know there's a lot of rewrites that Ms. Dickerson wanted to do about different fouls and updating some definitions. But I think before this body tackles it, because it is a very robust, it would probably, if you remember the chicken discussion, this would probably go down that path where you may not be able to make any progress because it is so taxing that the city attorney's office may need to want to review that, make some adjustments because it has been, I don't know, 20 years, and then bring that forward to you all. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Colleen?
Yeah. We made a change, to domesticated animals, but they didn't follow through on 10, 11, and 14 of 1A. It still says dogs and cats there. So we need to ask them to finish the job and change that to domestic animals. But there are some changes that need to be made because we made that change. We do need to do a comprehensive review of how the other animals section is dealt with, because if we put livestock in it as domesticated animals, that whole section needs to be addressed in 1A, not in 1C. But that's up to the committee if we're going to do any comprehensive review, which is our job, is to do a comprehensive review. And just changing that one from dogs and cats to domesticated animals actually made it really hard to, I think it just needs to be reviewed, and we at least need to get them, that to follow through with changing dogs and cats in 10, 11, and 14 to domesticated animals.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. So we'll go ahead and leave that on. The 8th item that we had identified that was based on the recommendation from the trash committee that is looking like at a single source provider. And we put that on our radar in case that proposal came through and there would be changes needed to support that revision. And so I would recommend keeping it on because that proposal has not come through yet. Would that be right, Carson? I mean, okay,
Yeah, that's what I would think.
okay, cool. Cara, your hand is raised.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to ask on, the point that Colleen makes on the, the dogs and cats definition, and I know this came up a while ago. Did we ever get a new city attorney? Does anybody know?
Yes.
We did.
Sorry.
We met her at the
I've been
city
really
council
busy this
meeting.
month.
Yep, she is there.
Okay, so then, to that point, like, I agree, like, the code's not perfect, and there's definitely room for improvement. But would we not just recommend to the city attorney's office to, I guess, to look into that and to clean it up a bit, or? I don't know what the process is. I know, like, we don't write the code, we make recommendations, so that's where I'm going with this.
So the procedure to change code, per our recommendation actually goes to council to approve the resource dedicated by the city attorney's office to change code. So, no, we can't. Yeah.
We would have to
That
identify
doesn't
the
mean we
problems
can't,
and then,
yeah,
okay.
that doesn't mean we can't have a conversation with her and give her a heads up. And she may say, I'm just going to go ahead and take care of it because it's obviously needs to be updated, but just, from a process perspective, that's what's supposed to happen.
Got it, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Dave?
Just to give you that update, and I don't think I explained it properly. So when you all made the adjustment, that already triggered the review of the rest of the title because of missing the city attorney for a while and not having that deputy city attorney that specializes in that area like our previous one did. That has kind of been put on the side due to some other pressing matters within the city. So the Title VII reorganization and slight updates is still in process. We have had conversations about it. It's just not in the phase where we can present it yet, only because we're basically triaging a bunch of other things within the city, I guess is the best way to put it.
Excuse me. Okay.
But we are not running into any complications with enforcement related to Title VII.
Okay. Thank you. So at this point, that was our 2021 priorities. The only other thing I can think of is, based on what I've been hearing, is the off-leash, task force recommendation. I want to sneeze, but I don't want to sneeze. That proposal, I think, is going back to city council, and it may also impact code. Would we want to put that on our radar when that proposal comes out? Rita?
Actually, I apologize for not giving an update on this. 2 weeks ago, we passed a resolution of changing the off-leash dog parks. And then this last Monday night, it got changed to an ordinance by really one council member wanted to make it an ordinance. And so everybody agreed. So we voted on first reading this last Monday night. Really taking away off-leash privileges at Centennial Park altogether. There is a permanent fence going up in Jason Park and then a temporary fence during certain seasons for the ball field at Jason Park. And then there is a permanent fence going to go up on Duncan Park, splitting the park in half. And so the off-leash dogs would have half of it. So it already has gone to an ordinance. And so, I mean, it is possible that when a new council is seated, that could change. It also could change. I think part of the reason the council member that really wanted to bring it forward as an ordinance would give the citizens an opportunity to do a referendum. You can do a referendum on an ordinance, but not on a resolution. So, but it also then becomes codified into law and it will be written in the Muni Code when it's an ordinance. So for right now, it's going to be, I mean, I think probably whatever happens, if nothing happens to change it, council may look at this again in a year just to see how it's working. I know that a lot of the off-leash dog people are not happy, but so we'll go from there. But so it has been taken care of to a certain extent.
Thank you. Colleen, your hand's raised.
Yeah, this is sort of a question for Rita, but it's also an addition to that. That ordinance will be in Title 11 under Parks. It has nothing to do with Title 7.
The ordinance will not be under parks. It will be written under dogs, I think. But if we'd have left it as a resolution, it would have been under parks. You're exactly right about that. But because it's been, I don't know what title it will go under, but it will be written into the Muni Code. I don't think it's under parks, but you might be right. I don't know for sure.
But it's a park rule is what I'm saying. And so it's the Parks Department that's doing it. It's mentioned in Title 11, the Parks title, where they did a rule about leashing dogs in parks. And so that's it. It's strictly for parks.
Well, it could be there, but the one thing that making it an ordinance takes it out of the city manager's purview to make park rules. It's now no longer under his purview, but it will be in the Muni Code.
So they are changing, well, it's under his purview in the ordinance about parks. That's what's confusing to me. And I think to everybody else. And he's the only one that can enforce park rules, even if it's an ordinance within the park thing. The enforcement is only through the city manager. At least it was the last time I looked in Title 11. So it's very confusing, but
Okay.
it's a separate issue from the rules on dogs in general, because it's parks. It's
All
a
right,
park.
thank you.
Yes.
I will check that out because it comes back for second reading the next council meeting. So I will make sure to check that out. Thank you for bringing that up, Colleen.
I would appreciate it. Yeah, I just, it's always been confusing to me that there would be an ordinance that only the city manager could enforce.
Maureen, your hand is raised.
Yes, that is Council Bill 49, and the second reading will be heard on November 1st. And in the title of Council Bill 49, it states that it's amending 7(1)(a)(3).
that's only for at-large dogs. So how's it amending that if it's a park rule? There's something screwy about that. Yeah. I would,
Well, we don't need to cover that here. I'm just going to put it on our list of things to look into if necessary. And I think, Dave, you had your hand raised.
Yes, I don't need to comment on that. Maureen
Okay.
commented.
Okay. So I'm going to ask the committee now, are there any priorities that we haven't already discussed that you think that we should put on our priority list for 2022? Colleen?
yeah, on the next page from 2020, you said considered and removed. I'd like to look into Title 15 on vehicles, because the Citizens Initiative of 2011, which repealed a particular code that had been an ordinance that had been done in 2011,
Right.
it says that it was done by a vote of the people, but those two things do not reflect what the Citizen Initiative said. There was a real problem when they put the Citizen Initiative in. It went Brotzman and Comer revised accordingly. That was the only one that should have been revised, and it wasn't. And they took out a lot of the model transportation code out of the Title 11 on vehicles and transportation. So I'd like to look into that and address that, because it's limiting to one, and the Citizen Initiative was very specific. They can't limit it to two. So it can't be limited to one either.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. I will put that on our list. Did anybody else have any items that they wanted to put on our radar? Otherwise, what I'm going to do, we're running out of time here. I'm going to update this list, and then at our next meeting, we can prioritize, the first couple of things and see where we stand.
You went on mute, Chair Bowden.
I had sorry, where did I stop? How did that happen?
Prioritize.
Okay, priority. So I'll put together our list and we'll address, we'll finalize that at our next meeting. We're running out of time, and I wanted to give you an update on our council presentation. And then I had a question about procedure from Council Liaison Russell on how we move forward. So briefly, Carson and I presented to City Council on the 24th, I believe, something like that. And the presentation went very well. The council received our input, and they were very grateful for all the work that had been done by this committee. There were some really good questions raised. If you haven't looked at it, I suggest you do. But there were some follow-up tasks that they are asking us to provide, and I listed up what those tasks are. My question to you, Rita, is how do we go about that? Do we go back and present that to City Council, or do we just send a memo with all the information, or is there a combination? I'm not sure how that goes.
I totally spaced that out. And so in this, is it on page like 26, the items to consider?
We did, there was no material. There was no material in the agenda packet on this item. I just was going to share with everybody what council asked us to do, but when we do it, I'm not sure how to present it back to council. Is that a separate presentation, or do we respond in memo
Well,
form.
It
Your,
could
your
be, and
list
I-
is, I was just gonna say, member Russell, the list that Chair Bowden put is on page 2, the unfinished business A1 is the list of what council asked us for. Isn't that right, Chair Bowden?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So-
It, now, wait a second. It's on which one? 8?
Page
A-
2 of, yeah, 8A.
Okay,
Like you guys asked us about these different things, like are the info that we had come up with on all the different city programs, et cetera.
okay, so, I mean, I guess when you address those, if you do it in a meeting, you actually could send that information to council. I believe the city attorney should be working on it, right, and bringing back what you all asked for. Is that correct?
In terms of code, yes. But this was really more information about what other cities are doing, that Mayor Olson asked us. One of them was to do a matrix on code comparison and program comparison between the cities that we had researched.
Okay,
And so I'm saying, well, we can do it. I just don't know how to send it back, whether it's a
So-
present.
if these are mostly questions that, and I would have to go back and refresh my memory on what it was. If it's mostly things that Mayor Olson wanted, by the time you got these all discussed, she will be gone off of council. If it was something that all of council wanted, then I think that you address them and send a communication back through me and through Maureen. I mean, Maureen would do that, and then, so,
I think we'll follow that path of action. Even though Mayor Olson requested it, it's something that maybe the rest of council and the new mayor would want to have that information. So we'll plan on moving forward with that.
right. and I think-
Thank you. We're over our scheduled time, so I'm going to, let's schedule our next meeting, which I believe will be November, I looked at that. 18th, 17th. Right? Yeah, November 17th, because the following week is Thanksgiving. All right, so with that, I'm going to call this meeting to close, and thank you all very much for your attention and input today and allowing me to transport from work back to home so that we could finish the call. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
You too.
Bye.